I recently stumbled across an online discussion following a Katie Hopkins video regarding the desirability, or otherwise, of a black James Bond. I suppose it had been triggered by the actor Idris Elba tweeting the names Elba, Idris Elba. In the comments, the consensus of opinion was that because Bond wasn't written as black, then Elba shouldn't be cast. But I thought I'd put another view. Anyway, this piqued my interest and I began to seek out interviews with the man. So job done, I suppose. His explanation was one of mischief making. He said that he was having fun stoking the rumour mill. And maybe he was just screwing around in order to publicise his new film, Yardy, which he directed. Again, job done, since I did read a review or two of it. And I'm interested to see it, having read the not particularly good novel some years ago. Hopefully it'll be one of those rare things, a film that is better than the book. But back to the mischief making. Elba had been mentioned before as a possible role for Bond, but Daniel Craig decided to stick around a bit for a bit longer, which is good since I think he's made a terrific Bond. But what was good for Craig may not have been so good for Elba, since although Craig is 50 now and coming to the end of his days as Bond, Elba is already 46, considering the time it takes to make a Bond film and the fact that the franchise has just lost Danny Boyle as director. If Elba is chosen as the next Bond, he may well be close to 50 by the time it's released. Now, I'm not being racist here, but I am being ageist. I reckon that's too old. Keeping the Bond legend going is always tricky, since Fleming's Bond was already in his 30s in Casino Royale in 1951. By that reckoning, he'd now be pushing 100. So in order to keep him at the same rough age, certain liberties have been taken with the story. Of most interest to me is him having won his Aston Martin DB5 in a poker game in Craig's 2006 Casino Royale, rather than that being provided him, much modified of course by Q Branch of MI6, in Sean Connery's 1964 Goldfinger. Messing around with the backstory never sits easily with me, but then, as I do love James Bond films, and always eagerly await the next instalment, it's something I have to accept, unless of course they become historical spy stories. But a lot has happened to the UK since 1951, although the first West Indian immigrants famously arrived aboard the SS Empire Windrush in 1948. Then it was just a trickle. But whilst it never became a flood, it did become a steady stream. And now the black population, that is specifically immigration from the Caribbean and from sub-Saharan Africa, now stands at 3% as per the 2011 census. It's probably a little more now to be honest, but we can probably safely assume a total population of around 2 million people. If you live in a city, it's probably going to see more than that, which it will be there, but those are the overall figures. But what does that mean in regard to James Bond? Not much, but it does mean something. It means that the idea of an Englishman, and to be clear, Bond, although British with Scottish and Swiss parentage, according to Fleming, really is English. So the idea of an Englishman might have shifted just a little, by 3% I suppose. But with a 3% rate in the British population being black, does that mean that it's time for a black Bond? No, of course it doesn't. Any more than a 50% rate of females in the UK means that it's time for a female Bond, God help us. But what does it mean? This is difficult to unpick, and James Bond fans are nothing if not a traditional bunch. Many people complained when Craig got the role simply because he didn't have dark hair, as if Roger Moore had never existed. Personally, I don't like it when he drives a foreign car. The BMWs, fine cars as they are, were a complete turn-off. As far as I'm concerned, Bond drives an Aston, and you can tell me all day long that in the books he drove a Bentley, but it will never wash. And again, it's more important that Bond drives an Aston than that he is white, but then that's probably just me. For others, maybe it's crucial that he carries a Walther PPK. On that I'm not so fussed. I was guessing that they don't make them anymore, but actually I've checked and they do. But even though James Bond is merely a work of fiction, he is important to the British psyche. In the 50s and 60s, he was important because Britain needed something glamorous, since although we had won the war, the great power status had quite obviously passed to the Americans. We were by then a second-rate power, but Bond, with his old word manners, made us feel as if we still mattered. And he's been doing it ever since, and that's why we love him. And because he is so important, people do get very, well, what should we say, very proprietorial over him, and that's understandable. After the apparent abortion that was the totally unnecessary female Ghostbusters, by all accounts, I didn't see it, and the faintly ridiculous idea that one of the superheroes now has to be a gay or a trans person, it is totally understandable that people might be suspicious of the motive of casting a black Bond. I mean, what is the significance of the sexual preference of a superhero? He's faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. He can leap tall buildings in a single bound, and he prefers to have sex with men rather than women. So bear that in mind when the school bus is teetering on the edge of the cliff. And what the fuck's that got to do with anything? A couple of years ago I watched quite a good little spy story starring Bill Nighy. I think it was called Page 8 or something. It was a low-key affair, and it was basically about an MI5 agent who had some damaging information about torture in CIA black sites and British complicity, and he had disappeared with the information, causing panic in the establishment. And there was this scene in which he met a former colleague in a cafe who was giving him some inside information about the authorities' search for him. In this little scene, which lasted no more than 5 minutes, this character revealed himself to the audience as gay. Not to Bill Nighy's character, of course, who already knew and was predictably oh so cool and accepting. Now the point is, it had absolutely not the slightest significance whatsoever to the plot. None at all, as far as I could see. But we had to be told. Why did we need to be told this? There was no reason at all, except the all-important reason that we must all be told all the time, at every opportunity, that gay people are everywhere. That not only are they everywhere, but they are all doing important and valuable jobs that make our society run properly. I mean, how sodding patronising, as if we don't know this. And why do they have to be so clangingly obvious about it? Why couldn't the gay character's partner just be introduced to us as Jeff or Bill, as the other person in the house? It could be then left to our imaginations, if we were at all interested, to work it out for ourselves. So who was that bloke then? Dunno, flatmate? Perhaps? Dunno, just a friend? Or maybe he's gay? Oh yeah, that could be it. I mean, what's wrong with that? As if our only knowledge of gay people is that they all have grubby sex on Hampstead Heath, and so we have to be re-educated. It's as if they think we've never heard of Alan Turing, for fuck's sake. Of course we know one of the reasons. It's so that gay people can be represented, so that young gay people can grow up and not think that there is something wrong or something shameful about them and their desires. And I can understand that, and it's the same reason why there are so many more black characters in film and television these days. Because one of the complaints that I've heard black actors make repeatedly is that there were so few in the past when they were growing up. Although, to be honest, I think that's overdone in most cases. there were more non-white characters than is given credit for. Anybody remember David Yip as the Chinese detective, for example, in the early 80s? That was a long-running series, and pretty good as I remember it. But there were, it has to be said, quite a few drug addicts or cardboard cutout villains. So I can understand that too. But I really think we're past that now. Television is peppered with endless significant and insignificant black characters these days, and far more than the 3% that will be technically correct. In addition to the newspaper articles featuring Idris Elba, I also listened to him when he was being interviewed by Craig Charles, and plugging his new film obviously. Craig Charles was standing in for Steve Wright whilst he was on holiday. Dutifully, Charles asked him about the Bond rumours, and Wussy was evading the question as he had done in print. Charles said to him, "If we can have a female Doctor Who, we can have a black James Bond." Charles then suggested that for him, for Craig Charles himself, as a black guy, it would be great to have a black James Bond. And I thought that was a bit strange. Well, not strange exactly, but it registered as ever so slightly odd, maybe not even odd, but I had to think about it for a while before I knew what it was. And it was this. It seemed strange to me that Craig Charles had described himself as black. Of course it's not strange, not in the least, since he is quite obviously a black guy, or at least mixed race. But the thing about that is that I've always thought of him, mostly, as a Scouser, as Lister, the laid-back, down-to-earth regular bloke in Red Dwarf, as a foil to the pompous, stuck-up character of Rimmer. I'm not saying I'm colourblind or anything as virtual signalling as that, but to me his defining characteristic was not that he was black, but that he was a street-smart Liverpudlian. And that got me thinking about Elba. Is he black or is he British? Well, of course he's both, but as a very charismatic actor who is a British native, I kind of claim some kinship with him. A kinship of the same type that I claim with James Bond. It's an unearned kinship, of course, since I've never met Idris Elba, any more than I've contributed anything to the character of 007. It's just that, like Bond, as a British bloke, I feel he's one of us. And I was thinking that that was a good thing, after analysing it, of course. And why is it a good thing? Well, because I thought that it showed how far we've come as a society. Now, a lot of people might be thinking that I've swallowed the multicultural lie, the propaganda that says, without any qualification, that our diversity is our strength. Well, I haven't. I did. But then I puked it all back out again. But this isn't anything to do with multiculturalism or diversity. This is about having the best man for the job. It's about who can carry off the role of James Bond 007, licensed to kill for Her Majesty's Secret Service. It's to Elba's credit, not so much that he is being considered for the role, although there is that, but that he is considering it. Often British people complain that their heritage is being watered down, ignored, overwritten, demonised, or made irrelevant. They are told that they are racist, imperialist, sexist and patriarchal, and that they must stop celebrating the racist, colonial, imperialist and sexist contributions made by their fathers, and it is mostly fathers and grandfathers. They feel that they are repeatedly told that they must celebrate the contributions of others, others that are unlike them, others who are not British and not white, because all of the things that their forefathers may have achieved have been sullied by racism and imperialism, and what's more, were probably achieved at the expense of the forefathers of the black and brown people in their midst, and therefore cannot be considered achievements at all. Now, although there is some truth in this, it is, of course, mostly bollocks, and everybody knows it. And because it is mostly bollocks, people are not falling for it. And they are refusing to apologise, not only for things that are not their fault, but they are refusing to be made ashamed of things that are not in the least shameful that their predecessors achieved, like beating the Nazis, for instance. But in this pushback of ancestor shaming, sometimes it understandably goes too far the other way. You can lose patience in being called a racist for the 100th time when you know that you are nothing of the kind. You can lose patience and you can get quite grumpy. And when you get grumpy, you lose the desire to please people. And when you stop being nice and stop caring about whether people like you or not, you begin to retaliate. You reason, they're going to call me a racist anyway, whether I am or not, so why should I care? And so you start doing what they do. You start talking the way they do. When they talk of white privilege, you counter with victim mentality. When one of their number writes a book called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, or some such bollocks, to which there is deliberately no counter, you react spitefully with diversity is not our strength. And when they say Black Lives Matter, you come back not guns blazing with White Lives Matter, but meekly with All Lives Matter, still hoping that you not be told once again that you're a racist. But it makes no difference, and so it begins to get nasty, and we all get further and further apart. But when we react in this way, we miss the good ways in which we're all getting along. A familiar complaint of Brits of its immigrant communities, as with all host nations of all immigrants in all of history, is that they don't act like us, or they don't want to mix with us, or they don't assimilate. They're just happy to live in ghettos. Now, those complaints could justifiably be levelled at some of the Muslims in Britain, and indeed at some of the newly arrived. But it's hardly fair to accuse Indians and West Indians of such a thing. If any of those things were ever true, it was mostly because they were prevented from mixing with the white population. You know, when proper old-fashioned racism really did exist. But West Indians in particular were fiercely pro-British and pro-monarchist when they arrived, and Indians just knuckled down and got on with the business of fitting in as best they could, providing a service and making something for themselves. There are, unfortunately, large and growing sections of society that really do not want anything to do with us, and think that it is perfectly reasonable for them to accept all the benefits of living in Britain without giving a flying shit about our country. There are people like that, but most immigrants are not like that. Most immigrants want to take their place in society and are prepared to work for it. Some are prepared to fight for it, and some, like Grenadian-born Johnson Bahari, winner of the Victoria Cross, the very highest medal awarded for bravery in conflict, seem quite prepared to die for it. So if a black man like Johnson Bahari can demonstrate what it means to be a real British hero, in the truest sense of the word, then surely we can accept, or indeed embrace, the idea of a black man being our imagined hero. That Elba would want to play Bond must surely demonstrate, as much as he is possibly able, his own sense of Britishness. But because society is not perfect, we bitch and we moan and we complain and we forget about all the good that there is. And there is good. There really is. With the notable exception of one particular religious group, and I tire of repeatedly pointing you out, for you know who you are, the different people of this country really do rub along together all right. We need to remember that. This country, the people in it, and the different races and creeds that have come to it over the past 70 years or so, have done a pretty good job, all things considered, of living side by side in relative peace. Think Britain is a racist country? Find me a less racist one. Now, I don't know Idris Elba, and I can only guess at his intentions and his motives. Of course, he's a successful actor who is ambitious to do more in his chosen field. As he said so himself, the part of 007 is perhaps the most coveted role in cinema. The ambitious Elba, the competitive and driven Elba, will probably want a part of that for his own personal reasons. That's only natural for a man in this position. But I would like to think, and I do think, without any particular evidence, that he might want the role for what it says about him as a black British man playing the previously white role of our favourite fictional British hero, and what it says about us, the mostly white British audience. I would like to think that maybe he wants to represent us. I would like to think that, although he would be pleased to know that a 10-year-old black kid could go to the cinema, imagine that maybe he too could grow up to be a British hero like James Bond. I mean, he'd definitely be thinking that. I would also think that he'd want to be respectful of the role and the position that it holds in our collective British imagination. I think he'd want, and not just for theatrical reasons, to do it justice and to not let us down. I think that he knows that we have to let him play Bond. I think he knows that he needs our permission. I think he knows that it's a gift, and it's a gift that he must be respectful of if he is to have our support. At the end of the day, it is perhaps only a fictional character, but it's not one that comes without responsibility. If Elba does get the part of 007, Bond is not being taken away from us and given to them, because they are us for the most part. They may be black or brown or whatever, but they are also British, in the same way that, unless you're some moronic white supremacist, although we may be white, we are also British and are therefore part of them. So when we, as the white British public, wounded by the repeated and unjust accusations of racism, when we abandon our usual good nature, openness and generosity of spirit, and retreat into playing them at their own game and retaliating with immature cries of cultural appropriation to see how they'd like it, as we complain that a black man shouldn't play Bond, we should know that we are not being our best selves. We should know that we will not look our best. We will just look mean and spiteful and weak, and yeah, we're also going to look racist. And think of all the damage that that will do to all of us, both black and white. Think of all those black people up and down the country who are maybe, just maybe, beginning to think that finally, after 3 or 4 generations, that they were properly accepted. Not accepted in theory or on paper or in their passports, but genuinely and affectionately accepted enough that they could maybe marry a prince, become Prime Minister, or better still, be able to play 007. So let's not be mean. Let us instead be British. And let's cheer for Elba if he gets to say the words, "The name's Bond, James Bond."